Top Game with your host, Sammy Castro. Episode 29, Marshall Troy, a close personal friend and Jiu Jitsu Black Belt. Marshall is a stalwart ambassador for Jiu Jitsu as therapy, particularly for veterans battling PTSD and struggling to cope with suicide ideation. Marshall and I first met back in August 2019 in Maine at the Immersion Camp. Hailing from the great state of Oklahoma, we shared an Uber from Portland to Camp Laurel and established an immediate connection. In August of 2021, we were able to meet up again in Maine for our second camp, grew our circle of friends, most notably in the Towhees Cabin, and shared quite a bit of time together, both on and off the mats. While there, we carved out some time to sit down, press record, and reflect on some of our experiences and observations since the last time we were together 2 years ago. During this interview, we cover our common close ties with LGBT family members, how that has impacted our dealings with those around us, and the influence we can make on those coping with the lack of acceptance, ostracism, and targeted hate. We also dive into how we've learned to navigate the sometimes turbulent discourse taking place on social media platforms. Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed on Top Game are those of the producers and or the guests appearing on the program and do not reflect the views and opinions of the United States Marine Corps or the Department of Defense. Thanks for tuning in.
I gotta admit, man, it's fucking so great to be here that it's almost indescribable for me. After I'd say, legitimately a year and a half of being away from the community in somewhat a self-imposed isolation due to the pandemic and just other things, the opportunity to come back here and, reconnect with guys like you and Sean and Ben and, everyone else has been phenomenal. And, just everything from the continuity in terms of communication and contact since, 2 years ago to now has been helpful in ways that you probably can't imagine. Maybe you can, but it's still difficult to convey. But, kind of walk me through what the pandemic was like for you in Oklahoma.
Man, my wife is a nurse practitioner, so she's in mental health, but she did primary care and urgent care and stuff like that. And, I thought she would be kind of weirded out by it, and she wasn't, which was good because I had friends that had wives or friends that had husbands that were freaking out. But, so that was nice, not having to worry about that. For her, everything was normal. We just, we stopped seeing as many people inside the clinic and started doing more virtual and phone calls and stuff. But eventually I kind of bought into it. Like I found myself on r/coronavirus and like reading into it and going, man, people are dying. I'm like, oh God. And it's like, and they're more like, I probably swing both on all kinds of different topics, but Reddit's more liberal, so they're really out there pushing it hard. Like this is super dangerous, and probably a little more than maybe what I feel like now. So I took the time off completely and kept my son at home. Took him out of daycare, kept him at home, and just kind of took care of him and streamed and did stuff like that, changed up my schedule a little bit on that. And then it came back time to where they were doing reopening back in phases in Oklahoma, which is where I live. And one of the guys, like the owner of the headquarters location, was like, let's just open up, and then the other guy, another one of the instructors, was like, yeah, let's just blow it wide open and go back to normal. That's probably like, I was like, guys, you probably should like assess this, it's like, you could be the reason for someone dying, so it's like, kind of got them we did some solo stuff, and where we
Just like
just
private sessions.
no, we did group sessions, but they were like segregated. They were like 8 feet apart on the mats,
Okay.
and solo drills. Like I didn't touch them. I was up at the front, separated from them.
This is before the vaccine.
This is before the vaccine, yeah. So we did that. Phase 2 came along. We did the same thing. Phase 3 came along, and we just forgot there was coronavirus. I just went back to normal. And by then I was like, it is what it is, So just started training back to normal, And Norman was a little bit, which is where I live. It's a university town. The University of Oklahoma is there, so they're a little more liberal too. They extended the shutdown a little bit more, and then the mayor, they started taking votes to kick her out because of that. Like
Wow.
the businesses were like, no, you're not shutting us down any longer. Like, because the governor was like, you guys are good. You just need to, there needs to be limits to how many people are in there. You need to wear a mask, stuff like that. But it's pretty conservative in a sense. Conservative response. We went back, I would say I was probably off the mats for a couple months, but I was lucky that my strength conditioning coach, they were still doing the gyms, and they shut down the gyms, and he had like all his old equipment from his old gym at his house. So he's like, man, it's just really just you. I have you, and he has another kid that has Down syndrome that he trained that was left. So we weren't there at the same time, but I stayed lifting 3 times a week. So I had to do something.
Yeah.
Like I was like, man, if I sit at home and I don't do something physical with my body, I'm gonna go bonkers, man. And so I kept up with that, which was pretty much a lifesaver. And then went back to teaching. And fortunately, ended up getting COVID. And I'm pretty stubborn in a sense. Like, I was like, I don't feel great, but I'll just go in and not teach. So I went in
When you had COVID.
Yeah. This is probably not smart, but I did it as smart as you can, because I had flu-like symptoms.
Okay.
I didn't lose my sense of smell or taste until like a week after this, when I didn't even have symptoms outside of those. So I show up, I was like, hey, I'm going to bow you guys in. It's just going to be an open mat. I'm going to be over here by myself. When we bow out, don't come up and shake my hand, nothing, don't touch me, nothing. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not COVID. It's something probably like a cold or something, because I had congestion. And it was almost like a head cold is what it felt like.
Okay.
And I got done with class, and I lived 10 minutes away from the gym, and I started driving home, and I felt exponentially worse, like horrible, to the point that I was like, you just need to make it home.
Damn.
Yeah, I was like almost to the point where I was like, I need to pull over and let someone else drive.
Survival mode.
Yeah. So I got home, and my wife, we own a clinic. So we had do we have the test at the time? I don't think we had the test at the time. So we went to an urgent care that she contracts with, and we went and got tested, and her and I were both positive.
Damn.
She was asymptomatic. And Theo, today 4, it's his birthday today. So
happy birthday, Theo.
Yeah, right. He had a weird little cold like a week before. So we think we may have got it from him, because I put him back in daycare, because they were like, with kids, they were like, it's not really affecting him, especially as young as he is. They're like, he may get diarrhea or something. And he had like a runny nose or something. So we think we may have got it from him. And then, so I lost my sense of smell. I lost my sense of taste for like maybe 8 hours. A week after those symptoms, like the first day or two of having symptoms was really rough. And then after that, I started getting shortness of breath too. And that sucked, because I remember I was at a tournament. I ran up a flight of stairs to the second story to go talk to this family, and I was like winded. I I was like breathing hard, like I like rolled 3 rounds back to back for 15 minutes, and I dealt with that for 6
That's
weeks.
how I felt last night.
Right? Yeah, exactly. It was so hot, man. Humid too. Here. So dealt with that, got past that, gave me a little bit perspective. I was grateful for the fact that I didn't have serious problems with it. So I had a student that got it, and she had blood pressure problems for like 2 months.
Damn.
Yeah. So
Do you think it's something that's going to be chronic and persistent in
yeah,
terms
I think it's
of?
going to be like the flu. Like it's just going to come in seasons, and we're probably.
No, I'm talking about her symptoms.
Oh, her symptoms?
Yeah.
No, she's good now.
Okay.
So it was about 2 months, so like a month and a half, 2 months. She had problems with it, and but she was trying to train, and then her blood pressure would just like shoot through the roof, and because it was already high.
Yeah.
And so, man, we don't know. Could have had permanent effects on her heart, So.
And I think that's probably the greatest takeaway from all of this is that it's been difficult to identify, clear and concise information associated with it, and that's made it difficult. And then you have the fact that the whole thing got politicized, and it just exacerbated the problem from there. It became a political point, and unfortunately, it's taken its toll on us in terms of cohesion.
Yeah.
And then, from a health standpoint, I mean, there are lives lost associated with, a lack of understanding, and even if they did understand, or if the information was communicated, it was a lack of application of that information and acting on it in a manner that would have been effective or efficient to kind of mitigate the impact. But, what can you do?
That's the unfortunate part, is it costs people their loved ones, man.
Yeah.
And it's like I had a student of mine that was a friend of mine, had survived some horrific shit in the Middle East. And it's okay, I cuss, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
This is a Marine centric podcast.
I thought about it after I asked it. I was like, but got cancer right before COVID.
Okay.
And then COVID hit him, and that was pretty much the final straw. Compromising his immune system big time, and then he ended up getting an infection, and that's what ended up costing him his life.
Damn.
Yeah, it's he actually it was really nice. We're at this camp and Jocko's here and stuff like that. I made a post on Twitter because at one point in time he pulled security for Jocko's team in Ramadi. He was in Ramadi when Jocko was.
Okay.
And they set up a perimeter for them to go in and get somebody. And I posted that on there, and Jocko said something really nice on Twitter, just in memory of him. So I thought that was cool that he actually took the time to read the post and comment on it. So, yeah, he was.
As we discovered today, he's been busy as he is. Taking time out like that almost seems like a luxury.
Yeah.
But it just speaks to almost like the universality of all of this across the spectrum, because it doesn't give a fuck whether you lean left or right and what color your skin is, who you pray to, none of that shit. It's decisively engaged.
Exactly. Yeah, it has a mission, and that's to mess you up, man, and or potentially kill you. My mom wasn't. I think that's maybe what fueled my anxiety. Is my mom wasn't taking it serious at all, and she has an autoimmune disease, and along with several other things. And I was just like, she's like, well, I'm just going to the store and blah, blah. I'm like, no, you don't need to, like, she's like, well, what do you think? What am I supposed to do? I'm like, well, we go to the store for you. And it's like, and so we did her grocery shopping and stuff like that. I feel bad for her because she couldn't see her grandson for like a while too. And that was difficult. And
he's like a little rat. He's a potential vector, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's all he is. Well, you have kids when they're really young, they're just vectors of all kinds of stuff, They're just little germ machines. I've been sick so much since we've had him. So she couldn't see him. And then she has a partner that has dementia, and she's in a nursing home. So of course they locked down nursing homes. They just locked them down again.
Damn.
So she couldn't see her. So like right now, currently what she's doing is she'll go up to the place and her partner will open up the window in her room and they'll just talk through the window. So
That's got to be tough.
yeah, it's tough, man. So they've been together for like somewhere between 16 and 20 years. So
how old were you when you found out that your mom was lesbian?
really young, like really young. My mom was already kind of like uncertain of her sexuality when she got pregnant with me, and then after that, pretty much was just homosexual after that. And I think she told me when I was like 6 or 7, because the story is kind of sad in a sense. My mom.
And just for clarification, like nothing has to get released after you until you and I get a chance to chop on it and agree, and then we'll push it out.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. But I went to school because she told me. I was happy for her because her parents, my grandparents, disowned her after they found out.
Damn.
So they kind of came back in the loop when I was born. So I went to
It's
school.
interesting how that dynamic shifts the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It modifies the calculus to the point that it forces them to reconsider. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but usually that's the forcing function.
Yeah. And I was lucky too, in a couple senses, and I'll get to that there in a second. But I went to school and I was so happy for my mom. And I told the kids at the school, I was like, my mom's gay. And they were like, what? Your mom's gay? And then I got my ass beat that day. But I mean, I did. They were just so, back then being homosexual was
In Oklahoma.
Yeah, in Oklahoma too was
Right.
very taboo, which you didn't come out of the closet. It took my mom like a while to officially kind of come out of the closet.
Yeah.
And a lot of her friends, some of them even still to this day, it's a very small percentage, still live that lifestyle where they're not like openly homosexual because there was violence. We used to go to a diner there's a strip of a street that's like couple miles long, but it's like the homosexual district.
Right.
And there was a diner that we used to go there, and we stopped going there for a little bit, and someone came through and did a drive-by on it and killed a couple of people.
Fuck.
Just because they were homosexual.
Yeah.
So, but being on that end, the cool thing about being raised by a homosexual parent and the homosexual community was that they taught me to just be who you are.
Yeah.
Because that's all they wanted to be. Is they're like, I just like the same sex. Like, I go to work, I pay my bills, I drive a car, put my pants on the same way. I just not attracted to the opposite sex. So they just wanted to live their life normal and be who they were. So that kind of taught me to be like that. Just be who you are. Don't try to be somebody else. Because, I mean, literally, homosexuals kill themselves, like commit suicide because of that, because they can't be who they are.
Yeah, I've been reluctant to mention it in podcasts previous because of the fact that I've always identified it as Enrique's choice to discuss his sexual orientation, and I didn't want to presage or preempt that capability, and he'll have the conversation when and where he thinks it's appropriate, and because he's not flamboyant or effeminate. He's masculine, and he'll let you know where he stands, but he doesn't. And part of it came through, our relationship with the former ambassador to the Dominican Republic when we were stationed there, and his husband, who were the first openly gay couple to serve as an ambassador, as in the DR, and that was met with some tension and hostility, as you can imagine, because the DR is Catholicism is the official religion of their state, and the way in which they explained it to us was that it was Enrique's right to be able to determine when he was ready to share that information with others. And we went through a series of engagements with some nonprofit organizations and community discussion groups that were centered around LGBTQ plus youth, and just like learning the taxonomy and the nomenclature of all of that, and why it was important to support them in terms of their pronoun preferences and so forth. And it can become controversial in certain instances, but I think to your point, the component of self-respect has been kind of, for me at least, the respect and self-respect has been kind of the point in which I pivot to assist and provide the level of I guess comfort and security within my sphere of influence. And I've had homosexual service members working with me as subordinates, as peers, and then as senior leaders in and around me. And the times in which they find out that I'm an ally,
Oh yeah.
like you can just see like a weight off of their chest or their shoulders. It's just like to have someone that they can be themselves with, even just in conversation, is huge for them, because particularly in the Marine Corps, which is arguably one of the more conservative of the branches, there's still some ostracism and reluctance in terms of acceptance for those within the LGBTQ plus community, even though it's officially and openly reprimanded when it presents itself. It's still present. They've just gotten better at concealing it, and that's the part that makes it difficult, because it remains there just below the surface. But for Enrique, I've stayed away from it in conversations in the past. But he's 19 now, getting ready to be 20. He's a sophomore in college, and I'm so proud of him, and all the things that he's doing and how he handles himself. But yet and still, as a father, you worry, right? Because you can't put a bubble around them. It's one of the reasons why they got into jiu-jitsu, is because I knew that he wasn't going to be able to, I wasn't going to be able to defend him at all times. He needed to have the ability to defend himself, and everything that comes along with just confidence and self-assurance associated with training and the gentle art, right? Because it can sometimes be not so gentle, as you can attest from last night, right?
yeah, my neck is.
But the overarching goal that I've kind of pointed to as a father, and my perspective to raising Enrique and Vicente, is to make them self-sufficient and independent when I'm no longer there to provide and protect and care for them. And yet and still, someone would love to do him harm just based on who he loves.
Yeah.
And that's frightening.
Yeah.
Right. And one of the horrific aspects of what's going on in Afghanistan right now with regard to the Taliban is the level of extremism that they're going to apply Sharia law, and the lack of tolerance that will be there for people who think differently than what their orthodox teachings allow for, and what that's going to mean in terms of a human cost when someone is getting stoned for reading a book that they're not supposed to be reading, or loving someone that they're not supposed to love in the eyes of their government. and it makes it tough to swallow. And I saw Jocko's, I saw that Jocko made a post. I didn't dive into it, but it without even knowing the context of what he was saying, the fact that he said anything and just expressed his opinion about the matter, I think bodes well because of his judgment, because of his experience, and because of his history. It allows for him to model the behavior that more should start to display in terms of being actively involved in what's going on, not just in the political landscape, but in the information environment as a whole. And so that kind of leads me back to, where is it besides Reddit, which you already mentioned, that you gain your information, and how do you apply that in your day-to-day interactions when you come across people that have alternative perspectives?
Yeah, like news and stuff like that. It's got to be like, I'm just scrolling through social media and something just is trending, and then I see it and I kind of read about it, and then if it catches my eye, then I try to get like as many perspectives as I can, and then, if that's social media, what people are saying, their opinion is, what the articles are saying, so, and then just kind of going from there. But man, I had a guy, I sold cars for a long time, and there was this guy named Leonard that was always just chilling on his own. And like, selling cars is just a weird environment. It's like, it's very kind of immature. It's kind of lawless.
What do you mean by immature? Explain that.
Like, someone would try to get in on one of your deals, so they could get half the commission. Poaching. Yeah. We call it skating. So, and you would get your ass beat for that.
As you should.
Yeah. So,
big dogs got to eat.
Yeah. And I learned a term called, when the pond dries up, the alligators eat each other. And I would see that almost every end of the month.
When the pond dries up, the alligators eat each other.
Yes. And I watched that towards the end of the month, every month. And
there's no fat on that statement. That's just no. Delectable goodness, wisdom,
it's
right
just
there.
Nature, it's like, so Leonard would always, like, there would be drama, and there was guys on the lot, and really their whole intent was just to like spin you out, like get you off your game, and that's what entertained them, so you wouldn't be successful. And he never got roped into that. And I asked him one day, I said, Leonard, why do you not? How do you stay not involved in this stuff, right? He's like, man, I'm just in my own island. If nothing's coming into that island or doing anything like that, I'm not worried about it at all. So I kind of took that perspective, like kind of like rings in a tree, how close they are, proximity to the people that are closest to me. And then, so when I see something, I have the same knee-jerk reaction that everybody else has. They're like, this happened in this, and you're like, that's terrible, or you're angry, why would someone be allowed to do that? And it sounds selfish, but I take it back. Does this affect me directly? No. Does it affect my family directly? No. Does it affect my close friends directly? No. What about the people that I maybe interact with that aren't friends, associates and stuff like that? No. What does it even really matter? Why am I getting upset? Does it matter that I get involved in this at all? No. And is my opinion on Facebook or debating, sorry, I did air quotes there, debating on Facebook.
The violent change? Bunnies.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Is that going to affect the outcome of what happens? No. All it's going to do is have a positive or negative effect on me, which then ripples out like a butterfly effect. It affects my family, my close friends, my associates. So when it comes to like news and stuff like that, I tend to be willfully ignorant, because all I'm worried about is just taking care of the people that are closest to me, myself and the people that are closest to me. So that's kind of what's going on there.
But at what point in time do you think that you start to incur an obligation to have a greater influence on those around you? in a manner that has secondary and tertiary benefits for the greater good?
Yeah, I always had this. So it goes back to me being a kid. I wanted to be a police officer when I grew up, and the reason I wanted to be a police officer is because I wanted to serve. I wanted to serve my community, right? So then, what's the grander scheme of that? What's the greater good
Greater
of
good,
that?
yeah.
The military. So it's like, I'll go into the military. And first time I got rejected because I had my GED. And I wasn't even looking at your branch. They probably would have taken me, but I was like,
Actually, it's harder. I think I could be wrong, but I've got recruiters that are 2600s that listen. They could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's more difficult to get in the Marine Corps with a GED than some of the other branches.
yeah. Air Force was the one that I could have got into.
Really?
So yeah, which was weird. Like I wanted to go Army because kind of similar to what your story is. You want to click triggers. I'm like, I love guns. Yeah, I'll just go do infantry. My grandfather at the time was like, no. He got in initially as artillery and then ended up getting in on the engineering side, and he wanted me to like not do the front of it and do the back end of kind of his military career. So, but I still wanted to go do that. So I looked at the Air Force, and I was like, well, what's the most badass thing I feel like I can do in the Air Force? And I looked at TAC-P. I was like, I can blow shit up. And then I get to be with people who I think, who are my heroes. I get to be with Green Berets and all kinds of different squadrons and stuff like that, or doing special forces operations, or just kicking down doors and shit like that, So they just went through, because I wanted to do that, they went through me with like a fine tooth comb. And they found a couple little small things, which at first they were like, I think honestly, I didn't have a great recruiter. Like I had friends that were like, my recruiter wouldn't even ask me that. Like, not that it's an ethical thing, but
Right.
he's like, did you have therapy when you were younger? I was like, yeah. He's like, okay, well, you have to have proof of that. And I was like, well, we want to make sure you're not killing cats and stuff like that. I was like, okay, so I got it. And then we find out at some point in time, my psychologist wrote me a script and I filled it for an inhaler. And I never used it. So then MEPS was like, you have asthma. I was like, well, I don't. I do jujitsu like 4 to 5 hours a day, 6 days a week.
What belt were you at this time?
I was a blue belt.
Okay.
So, and I was about to go full. No, I wasn't full time yet. I was still working. So, MEPS, like, they're super efficient. They're just burning. No, this was like every 5-6 months I would get something back. So I went to see a pulmonary specialist, and they wrote, they see no signs of me having asthma or anything like that. So recruiter sends that in. 6 months later, military's still hard on, you have asthma. I was like, so you're going to take a psychologist over a pulmonary specialist? So that hit me really hard, because I really wanted to get in and serve. I've always liked people like you and other military people that have served our country. I always like put them on a pedestal. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. I don't really care. That's just my opinion. So it was heartbreaking. So I was doing jiu-jitsu the whole time. So the theme there was that I wanted to help people. I wanted to serve. So
Serviam.
yeah. So so I was trying to find a way to do that. I didn't want to take the traditional route, which was to be like a therapist or a psychiatrist or psychologist. That just didn't seem like.
You think it was because your proximity to the healthcare industry or healthcare occupations through your wife?
No, I wanted to help the people that weren't, that wouldn't go that route. I wanted kind of like a back door to the people that were suffering, but wouldn't go get help.
Okay.
So I got involved with Mission 22 at the beginning. Which
So you're talking about the guys that seek peace and tranquility on the mats.
This is what it led up to.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Which sounds counterintuitive, right, to the uninitiated.
You're exactly right. Yeah, you would think, you know, as brutal as our sport is and stuff like that, that it wouldn't be therapeutic, but it is. So I get involved with Mission 22, which is all about, you know, it's the average is 22 veterans a day take their lives, and they're all about spreading awareness. Well, I end up running into a guy named Alan Shabaro that starts this organization called We Defy. They do a big Mission 22 seminar down in Dallas, and since I'm like 3 hours away from Dallas,
You said Alan Shabaro?
Alan Shabaro. So they do a big camp, a 2-day camp, and it's like legends that are at this. Our head affiliate, which is Hanato Tavares, he's teaching at it, and we're like Kurt Osiander's there, Chris Howder's there, just all these.
Who's Kurt Osiander? I'm just kidding.
Right. He fucked up a long time ago, not remembering who Kurt Osiander. Right.
So is We Defy different from New Defiant, or is it the same?
Okay, yeah, it is. So
Okay.
New Defiant is like more of an apparel. So, and they don't work together anymore. So
So there was a splintering or
split.
fracture between the two of them.
Yeah. So
that's good to know, because I thought they were one and the same.
yeah. It translates
Yeah.
the same. So, but it's not the same. Jeff Perez owns New Defiant, and he was part of We Defy, and I don't know what happened, but he's not part of We Defy anymore.
Yeah, it's been my experience over the years that not just in the 501 Charlie 3 surrounding veteran support services, but also within the Jiu Jitsu community, there's a lot of political drama that goes on in the background, and I try to stay as far away from it as possible, kind of like your buddy from the car sales lot.
Yeah.
Because you can get sucked into that just by, proximity and association, and that makes it difficult. But being a jiu-jitero on active duty, because you're transient in nature, you're kind of exonerated from the expectation to not be a creonch.
Yeah, exactly. Well, so the crazy thing about this, so I go to this seminar, I look and see what Mission 22 is about. I'm not part of Mission 22 at this time. But I go because of these greats. And I'm like, oh, they're raising money for a veteran organization. This is perfect. I'm going to learn a whole bunch of cool jiu-jitsu, and it's going to go back to veterans, right? The money's going back to veterans. Well, Alan Shabaro speaks at the tail end of this and tells his story and why he struggles. And I won't go into the story exactly, because at the time he asked not to be recorded and everything like that.
Right.
But the long story short, the reason he struggled, and he's a former Green Beret, and wasn't because of the stuff he did, it's because there was several moments in his career that he felt like he could have done more. And I thought that was really admirable.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is how I can help people.
Yeah.
So he has an organization called We Defy, which sponsors disabled combat veterans to do jiu-jitsu. So eventually I'm with Mission 22. I decide that I don't want to just spread awareness. Like, spreading awareness is good, but I actually want to get in the trenches. I want to help these veterans. I want to give them another option outside of taking their own life. So I end up becoming friends with Alan and working with his organization. And now I'm the state leader of Oklahoma for We Defy Foundation, and became friends with Alan, became friends with Joey Bozic, which is the co-founder. He's a triple amputee. And he's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu. And
how does that work?
I just Kimura trap him. Oh, you mean, how does that work? Yeah, no, I do. But he has the best attitude ever. We were rolling. So he's below the elbow on his right arm, and he has his full left arm. He's above the knees on his legs.
Wow.
So, ID, got blown up,
Yeah.
lost his limbs. So luckily, this is the time that, cat tourniquets were a thing, and that's what saved his life. So, but crazy thing, this will kind of tell you the kind of sense of humor he has. We're rolling one time. It's a We Defy seminar, and we decide to roll, and we're just rolling because he's like, man, I'm getting ready for this tournament. You mind if we roll? And I'm like, yeah, sure, we can roll. So I'm like rolling with him, and he's like, hey, look. I'm like, what? And he's like, look on the side of the mats. Well, it was an open mat, but once Joey and I are rolling together, everyone stops rolling. There's probably 50, 60 people on the edge of the mat just watching him and I roll. And he's like, help, he's beating up a crippled. I'm like, man, you jackass, dude. But man, I love him to death. He's the sweetest man on earth. It makes me emotional almost. Well, it does.
That's okay.
It's just,
this is a safe space. You can cry here.
Yeah, right. For a man that's had so much taken from him, he still wants to give.
Yeah.
And I'm lucky to have him and Alan because they put direction in my life, which was helping veterans, and this was my back door where I could help these guys and gals, and then it ended up going further from that. When I started talking about helping veterans and talking about veteran suicide with my students and stuff like that, I had, first responders come to me and talk to me. Then I had people of victims of assault come and talk to me, because that's the thing that I can most relate with. Because unfortunately, when I was younger, I was 7, 8 years old, my mom had a partner that abused me physically. And when we're talking about victims of abuse, I can empathize. On the flip side of that, I have PTSD from that. And, I don't know if the root of that is what caused me to have suicidal ideation. But that's another thing I can empathize with a veteran. Veteran says, I want to take my life. And I can say, man, I know what it feels like to be in your position. I've been there multiple times.
Yeah. And I've only shared this with a few of my Marines. But, kind of going back to what you were saying, I could have done more, and the weight that places on an individual's psyche and soul, it can rip you down, and it may not be instantaneous. It takes place over duration of time, and that's probably even more brutal. It can be Sisyphean in that regard, because you make some progress, and then you slide back, and the process and the cycle continues. I am fortunate, though, that this gun club of ours, the Marine Corps, has provided me a level of camaraderie and community and fraternity in a way that I can never, pay back. And it's one of the reasons why I've stuck around. You do a personal. The Marine Corps has an online website that we use for personnel management and other communications and stuff like that. And the PSMC, I think it's Personal Statement of Military Compensation, tells you how much you make, right? And for an E9, it's significantly more than when I came in as a Lance Corporal, right?
I hope so.
Yeah. But it's not about that, and in a lot of ways, what was instilled in me from the get-go, from the great mentors and leaders that I had around me that had an active role in developing the type of leader that I became, and still continue to strive to improve and become, was that you leave things better than you found them. And even though writ large the Marine Corps gives zero fucks about the individual Marine, the Marines themselves do. Yeah. Right. And that's where the humanity of it all gets injected. And I don't know if you know who George Bernard Shaw is. He's like an Irish playwright, but there's a quote of his that's really famous. And Elizabeth found this little, it's like a leather basket, where, you know, it's in my office. It's where I throw my keys and my sunglasses and my, you know, security badge and all that stuff. So I don't lose shit because of my ADHD. Right. But on the inside in Boston, and there is, you know, a gentleman puts more in the world than he takes out. And, you know, that speaks, you know, goes back to that requirement to serve and be of service to others. And one of the after actions that came out of Iraq before I deployed there that was being disseminated to the NCOs in our battalion was essentially like a farewell letter to the Marine Corps from a Chief Warrant Officer 5. And I want to say he was an 0306 burst and bomb gunner, and there's very few of those in the Marine Corps. They're essentially our weapons and tactics experts, and they're uniquely placed within the organizational structure to provide, you know, that level of experience and wisdom where it's most needed. But essentially, you know, he was like, we need to get out of the business of doing humanitarian assistance missions. The most humanitarian thing you can do for another human being is to kill their enemy.
Yeah. That's powerful.
Yeah, but you know, it's also, you know, somewhat trite in that there's a greater good that can be served in terms of opening the aperture and having those conversations. And I would be remiss if I didn't, you know, state that I've come across more than my share of Marines that were having, you know, the level of anxiety and issues surrounding, you know, past trauma in or out of combat, in or out of uniform, and how it's, you know, it was starting to manifest itself. And just, you know, just by virtue of maybe it's my personality, you know, I'm somewhat intrusive in terms of a leader. You know, I'll not forcefully, but strongly recommend that the Marines come over to the house to have dinner with the family. And it was one of those things in Okinawa that we did quite often because they were so separated from their loved ones, you know, on the other side of the earth. And but it resulted in the types of relationships and the types of interactions that allowed me to circumvent or prevent some of the you know, worst case scenarios from occurring. But even, you know, with all of that I was doing, there were still instances that, you know, I almost lost some Marines. And, you know, that's the last thing you want on your watch, right? You know, losing a Marine in combat, although, you know, as tragic as it is, you know, it's part of the calculus, right? But to lose a Marine in garrison because you didn't take the time to engage with them and to talk to them like a human being, like I would never, ever, ever want that on my conscience. And it reminds me of you know, growing up in Galveston. My father was a sheriff's deputy, and, you know, he used to keep his service revolver, you know, .357 Magnum Ruger. Like, you know, my dad was 5'6", maybe 150 pounds, carrying, you know, a big ass hand cannon like that. But one of the things I remember him saying to me was, you know, should you ever get into that dark of a place, and it may have been predicated off of something, some anecdote that he heard a story somebody shared with him, was like, please do not take your life with my service weapon. You know, and it kind of, you know, thinking about that reminds me of like talking to my Marines, like, you know, before you know, even contemplate harming yourself, I am always available to you. And in the way that in which we do, when we take, you know, time to sit kneecap to kneecap, eyeball to eyeball with those individuals in their darkest of times, you know, I've shared with them my own, you know, clouded moments that resulted in you know, me getting down those roads. And it was fortunately for me, when I was at my darkest moment where I couldn't even trust the Marines around me, that a DEA agent who I was close to by the name of John Koenig, he saw something, and he's like, Sam, you need to come with me. And he took me to the Yamasaki affiliate there in Santo Domingo and convinced me that not just I needed to be on the mats, but my sons needed to be on the mats with me, and what that meant. And that's kind of back in 2014 was when I started training jiu-jitsu again. And, it literally saved my life. I was contemplating the darkest of scenarios that would have resulted in, a tragic moment that I don't think Liz and the boys ever would have recovered from. And I didn't talk about it with her. I didn't talk about it with anybody. And I really didn't even talk about it with John. But, he pulled me out of that storm. And, the level of peace and tranquility that washes over me at the end of a great training session, it's indescribable. I don't know if it's the endorphins. There's probably some physical chemistry, biochemistry going on. I can't describe it, but there's also like that camaraderie and that sense of community, and then just the good-hearted, interest in self-improvement like that. I don't know where I saw it first, but I've adopted it and made it my own. It's like, the relentless pursuit of incremental improvement towards unattainable perfection in all things, not just jiu-jitsu, and being a good Marine, being a good SIGINT Marine, being a better electromagnetic warfare Marine, which is something that we've kind of lost our way on because it wasn't as sexy as the signals intelligence piece. And then, to a better PFT, CFT score, and then just going back to leadership principles and things like JJ did tie buckle, and asking questions of young Marines. Hey, Corporal Hobbs, you learned JJ did tie buckle in boot camp, but if you could add your own 2 leadership principles or traits, what would they be and why? And the responses you would get from that, like, okay, because all of those traits that we teach in boot camp, and as we start to lay that foundation, that groundwork, because we don't all come from the same background and experiences and upbringing and childhood and all that. So the Marine Corps, much like jiu-jitsu, is a melting pot, right? And so we have to establish a baseline. And it's one of the reasons why I like the more traditional formats for schools that, bow in and bow out and os and all of that.
Okay.
because it reminds us of almost a ritualized form of organized violence. And there's a lot there that ties in with the Marine Corps, right?
I can see that.
Right,
now that I know it's not a pineapple, it's exploding.
Yeah, it's a bursting bomb, definitely.
A bursting bomb.
Are you a pineapple sergeant? Yeah. Probably that was right. One of the greatest mistakes that I made coming here was with a water bottle that had a Master Guns rank insignia on it. But
I would say it hasn't been.
You're right. And so last night we had that bonfire. I broke out a bottle of whiskey and shared it with some of the Marines that I gravitated towards me, and we started talking, and some of these guys, they did their 4 years, their 5 years, and you can tell they miss it, right? But at the same time, to have even just that moment there, around that almost primitive moment around fire with whiskey and just the community and the camaraderie, which, I think a lot of us sorely missed during the pandemic. I was asked a question about why I've deliberately chosen not to compete while training jiu-jitsu. And, I think being completely honest, I mean, there's always a fear of failure to perform, right, and all of that. But I don't think that's it. For me, it's always been justified or rationalized, depending on how you look at it, by virtue of the fact that if I am going to get injured practicing jiu-jitsu, it's going to be during either competition or preparation for competition. And my number one priority is this occupation, this profession of mine, this way of life, if you will, within the Marine Corps. And the last thing I would want is if there's a deployment or, whatever, and I couldn't go.
Yeah, like
right.
A torn MCL or something.
Right. Exactly. Or it resulted in me having to exit service earlier than when I was ready.
Yeah, that would be unfortunate.
Right. And not that I'm in danger of that. I mean, I've had my share of injuries, broken a toe, dislocated my left shoulder quite a few times. And so I have to, baby that side more so than most. My last PFT, I was only able to get 12 pull-ups when I normally can do, for me, now with my age max is 20 without, even really breaking a sweat. But, that's okay, right? As a master of guns, they're not paying me to be an athlete any longer. They're paying me to be a long view, strategic thinker, a mentor, an advocate and a champion for harebrained schemes and oddball Marines, as I like to put it.
Is there a normal Marine?
There are more normal Marines than others, but I think the resounding or the central reason goes back to combat readiness, and it's one of the reasons why I've continued to pursue it, was because it keeps my headspace and timing where it needs to be. Elizabeth knows that if I go without training for too long of a period of time, it starts to manifest itself in unhealthy behaviors.
Yeah.
Right. And in terms of being short, in terms of temper with the boys, with her, lack of productivity around the house, just taking care of the little odds and ends that need to get done. And just establishing a mellow, tranquil baseline is all accelerated and improved through just getting on the mats, slapping knuckles, slapping hands, bumping knuckles, and just getting after it.
Yeah. And you're right. I was about to attack you in a sense, because you said I would probably get injured in competition, but then you said in preparation to, and I was like, damn it, he's covered all his bases. So because that's probably where you're going to get hurt.
Yeah,
is because you're going harder. If something's sore or not feeling good or something like that, you're like, but I have this competition, I have to go train,
right?
Or I'm gonna suck, So you go and train. I did a fight to win with a torn MCL. And I didn't come out on top of that. I'm pig-headed, bro. I think, it's just
so that kind of was my counter to the other Marine, the black belt that was trying to at least provide me. He wasn't trying to convince me or tell me I'm wrong. It wasn't that kind of conversation. He was just genuinely curious as to why, because as a black belt, and I'm sure you've seen this as a soon to be black belt, right? I don't want to curse you or preempt the promotion, but we all know it's coming, right?
Yeah.
Is that you see an accelerating or accelerant or catalytical component to your students that do compete versus those that don't. But I'm okay with being a hobbyist.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I think if anything, when we've talked, you told me that you didn't want to compete, and I kind of talked to you about it a little bit, and there may have been a little bit of discourse there, but I felt like spam calls, Jesus. I felt like you had thought it out. So, but the only thing I wanted you to do, if I was your instructor, is just to keep training. That's it.
Yeah.
So, and I've never I even still haven't pushed you when you were talking about you haven't trained since COVID, right? Or up until this, but you haven't found a home school yet. You've got one kind of narrowed down, but you haven't.
I think there's a lot of reasons why Yamasaki Springfield is going to be the choice. I mean, there are a lot of options in the National Capital Region. We had looked at 50-50, Team Koa. I mean, the list goes on and on. But I think the fact that we started with the Yamasaki team in the DR The fact that I've visited multiple times and it was always top notch, like instruction. I mean, I've had the opportunity to be around some phenomenal instructors across the gamut, down into the, annals of jiu-jitsu history, and like Neto is legit in the way in which he explains things, right? And, being a jarhead, I've seen my share of instructors, and he's probably one of the best I've seen in that regard, to include some of the great guys that we have here.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I mean, he's
there's a lot of guys that just haven't marketed themselves,
right,
and they're phenomenal instructors.
Yeah, but I think it's his command of is his eloquence and his clarity and explanation and the nuanced way in which he applies it towards the different students that are asking for more specifics or tweaks or adjustments based upon their body size. And I also get the impression that he is going to immediately be identified by my boys as like either the standard or the pinnacle. Not that it would take anything, not to take anything away from the guys that we have trained with in the past, but Neto is
There's levels to black belt,
right.
I mean, that's the thing.
And I would say that there's levels of black belt, but there's also levels to just instruction.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And and I've seen that. I've had Marines that were, above average, but phenomenal instructors.
Yeah.
And the Marines that were exceptional in the field, in terms of technical expertise, but they couldn't teach for shit because they didn't have the emotional intelligence to transfer understanding in a manner that was efficient and effective, because they just do it. They don't think about it because it's so easy for them because of, just basic innate aptitudes or capabilities, competence, whatever. And so they get frustrated having to explain it to someone.
Yeah.
And that comes through to the point that the Marines themselves, they'll stop asking questions. And that's where, as a leader, now as a master gunnery sergeant, mentoring master sergeants and mentoring gunnies and sometimes majors and even to some extent, lieutenants colonel is explaining how their reaction to their subordinates' questions, even though it may seem counterproductive or lacking in terms of the environment at that point in time, has secondary and tertiary effects towards it. But and I'll give you an example. So there's a Marine officer who just got promoted to lieutenant colonel, and when I was a young staff sergeant, he was entrusted to me and I was entrusted to him. And for a lot of us, it's not something that I think is really discussed too often, but when you're a staff NCO, like there's a transition there. You're no longer a sergeant. You're no longer a corporal. That game is over. You're a company man now as a staff NCO. And there's a difference in terms of expectations, decorum, etiquette, and your interactions with the officers changes tremendously. To include your requirement to be a mentor and guide to your junior officers, even though they outrank you. They don't have your experience level. They get paid more than you. And there's distinct differences in terms of roles and responsibilities, but it's your obligation to make sure that they don't find themselves in harm's way within the larger scheme of maneuver within the unit, the organization. And at this point in time, we were at Radio Battalion in Camp Laurel, North Carolina, and we had probably one of the saltiest master gunnery sergeants that I've ever come across. Serving as the operations chief for the battalion. And he and I, the lieutenant and I, were within a sub-organization underneath the operations section. We were in what we call S3D, which is detachment training. So a unit's getting ready to stand up to go out the door as they composite and kind of figure out who, if it's going to be 10 bodies or 20 bodies, whatever that's going to be. They stand up, and then we're the ones in the S3D section responsible for facilitating their training. So if that, the gamut, right? And my lieutenant walks into the operations office and for whatever reason ran afoul of the master guns, who essentially was yelling at him for reasons that the lieutenant didn't understand. Okay. Right. As you can imagine, right? So the lieutenant comes back and he's like, Staff Sergeant Castro, you mind if I close the door so we can talk for a second? And I was like, hey, sure, sir. Anytime. Like, whatever, So he closes the door and he's like, I don't know what the fuck I did, but, I walked in and Master Guns was, just screaming and yelling. Like, I don't even know if he knows, if he knows who I am, or why he was yelling at me. And I said, well, what did he say? He's like, well, he started talking about this, that, and the other. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? Don't worry about it, sir. Just keep pressing. Like, no harm, no foul. We'll figure it out. We got these things ahead of us. Let's, in Jocko speak, let's prioritize and execute. Like we'll come back to that later. And at the first opportunity that I had, because I'm thinking to myself, like, okay, I need to figure this out because I'm a new staff sergeant and I know what's expected from being the sergeant that's constantly watching like the subpar staff sergeants, the subpar gunnies that I saw because, as a subordinate within the Marine Corps, you're constantly looking at your leadership to determine what guys you want to be like and which guys you want to be fucking nothing like at all.
Yeah.
And I knew how my favorite gunnies took care of their officers and their sergeants. And I knew how they interacted with the master sergeants, and I knew how they interacted with the master gunnery sergeants. And there were times in which I learned that there is it's your responsibility to engage on behalf of your Marines, whether they outrank you or not, right? And so I walked into this is a pure Staff Sergeant Sammy Castro moment. I walk into the Master Guns office and I close the door without even asking him. I was like, hey, we need to talk Master Guns. He looks at me like what the fuck? And I was like, what am I doing wrong? And he kind of like looks at me like, what am I doing wrong? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I said, you're yelling at my lieutenant, which means that I'm fucked up because I haven't fixed him yet. And we've had enough time together that he shouldn't be coming into the 3 shop and feeling your wrath. Like, what did I do wrong? He's like, which one's your lieutenant? And I said his last name and he's like, oh, I thought he was the other guy.
Oh, no.
And I was like, okay, all right. And I said, well, good to go. And I just kind of like walked out. We just left it at that. Me and the Master Guns, because he and I had a very strong relationship. I'd worked with his detachment deployed somewhat previously when I was in a different assignment, and I facilitated their training. So when he came back to be the operations chief, he knew exactly who I was, and I had plenty of credibility with him. And so, knowing that, I probably took advantage of it in a way that Master Guns Castro probably wouldn't permit a staff sergeant to do. I don't know. Maybe I would. If the right staff sergeant would get away with that with me, but I wouldn't be chewing out the lieutenants like he did, because that's just not how I roll. But that Marine officer just got promoted to lieutenant colonel.
Wow.
And he called me up a few weeks back and asked me to come up to his location to pin an oak leaf on him.
That's the one you were talking about.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And I was trying to explain it to Vicente in the car, like what that means, in a way that he would understand, to be an influential and, stalwart brother to someone senior to me, who's gone through his own, trials and tribulations, because this gun club will chew you up.
Oh yeah.
And, like I said before, I mean, it's not about, how the organization views the individual Marine. It's how the individual Marines view each other and take care of each other. And I don't know if he fully comprehended what I was trying to convey. But I do know that he sees it when my Marines are around, and some of the interactions that he's had with my junior Marines. Because, I mean, as you can imagine, you know, my corporals, my sergeants, and now my staff sergeants, and even gunnies, they get a kick out of meeting my boys because they're mini-me's.
Yeah.
But they're mini-me's that have come up in an environment so close to me that they've developed in weird and awkward ways to be, to some extent, the opposite of me.
Yeah.
Right. Or to counter me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And that's kind of like the social jujitsu that takes place in within a household. But, you know, and I was listening to you yesterday talk about how, you know, Theo is just like all over the place because he's 4 and he's supposed to be, right? I mean, that's normal. But when you've got his attention at any moment in time, you're like, and let's do knee on belly.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just like, I've just heard of all these instructors that, like, you know, or people, you know, if a kid started at Theo's age, it was because their parent did it.
Yeah.
And they were high enough level to teach it. And it's given me so much that I'm like, I want him to have a part of that, you know, and it's not something I'm going to force upon him. I luckily, so you were talking about like bad sergeants, you know, bad.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it was bad, but you learn from those, and it's always a lesson. You learn what not to do. So I had an old instructor that forced his kid to do jujitsu.
Oh, how'd that play out?
Yeah, he hated it. And since it was part of his life and he owned a gym, he despised his dad going to teach. And sometimes he'd have to be there, and you could tell he was just miserable just being there. And it was a part of just a part of him that he hated about his father, you know. And it's like, I don't want Theo to have that. So, you know, will he be, you know, they're very impressionable by you. You know, you being their father, they're going to want to do what you do. But at some point in time, he's going to not want to do. Well, I mean, you've set a great example. So, I mean, I'd say listen to you talk about your leadership skills and stuff like that, and then listening to you to talk to people. Like last night, we had a Marine that walked up, said, "Oh, hey, you're a Master Gunny?" And you're like, "Yeah." And you're like, "Have a seat, man." And he was like, "Okay." You know, and I think he's probably had a lot of guys that you could easily be like, "Yeah, I'm a Master Gunny, man. I've been doing it for 22 years, you know.
Go fuck yourself."
Yeah. Fucking Rob, see you later. You know what I mean? Like, I'm, you know, I outrank you, you know, essentially. But you're like that guy was like, "Oh shit, this guy wants to sit down and talk to me." And then you guys sit there and talked about the Marine Corps. Same thing with like last night. And I honestly haven't laughed that hard until you guys were talking about what they did in boot camp. That was hilarious. I've heard some really funny stories and stuff like that when it came to the military. I mean, you made JP laugh, which is and he'd never heard of that. And he
made us tell the story 3 times in less than 10 minutes.
He did. Yeah. And I think I laughed every time. So, it's, you know, it's just, so playing back to that, at some point in time, he's going to not want to, maybe.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to force him. You know, there's a couple things I'd rather him not play. Like, honestly, I don't think I want him playing football, you know, because all the research showing CTE and contact. And
yeah, Oklahoma and Texas are both notorious for football in high school, and even in
contact football.
And we made that decision a long time ago. You know, a piece of unsolicited advice that I would offer to you, you know, and you could take it for what it's worth. It's just one dude talking, but Theo's not going to be a big man.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly what I explained to the boys. You know, you're going to be lucky if you're 5'7". But you will always have an obligation and responsibility to defend yourself.
Yeah.
That's immutable. That's an immutable truth. And not only that, but you have an obligation and responsibility to defend your loved ones. Mm-hmm. And jiu-jitsu is probably one of the easiest ways to be able to do that while incurring minimal damage to yourself. So, you know, the options are out there to include, you know, things like Krav Maga or Muay Thai or boxing. some of which, I've had my time with or played with in the past, to, include Marine Corps martial arts program. But jiu-jitsu is almost like the cheat code, and the boys being, nerds, like any way that they can accelerate like progress, has kind of spoken to them in ways that I've learned to leverage. The other thing is, I've never pushed them to competition. I've always just made it available. And I think a lot of it has been, they've chosen to compete based upon the fact that the sense of community and camaraderie associated with the team, and the understanding that for every medal that the team walks away with counts towards their professor's performance in the overall tournament. And, their willingness to give back, right? Yeah. And at least give it a shot. But I'll be honest with you, there's been some instances where the boys have come off the mat, with tears in their eyes, because they gave it their all, and didn't come out on top. And as a father, like, that's okay.
Yeah.
And I think it's actually even to a great extent better. Yeah. Right? Because, to lose in a controlled environment like that, where they inherently understand that if it had been a real fight, they would have been in danger. Mm-hmm. Right? But under controlled circumstances, with mom and dad watching, under the lights, under the camera, with all of the friends and family, cheering on the combatants, they at least got in there and they gave it their best, right? And that's kind of the rules that I've given them. Like, do your best in all things, have fun, because that's going to increase performance in a way that they won't understand just yet. And the last thing is be respectful, and that's the one that's probably the deepest. And I've had to explain it to them time and time again. Like, be respectful to others, but also have some self-respect, mm-hmm. and ensure that others exhibit the level of respect that you merit, just based upon your humanity and the fact that you are another human being on this earth, and what that means, and be respectful of the time, effort, and energy that has gone into getting you to this point, by your mom, your dad, your professor, your training partners. So that even though do your best, have fun, be respectful is a very concise statement or guidelines. Each of them have some amount of depth and complexity into them that they can kind of be expanded to cover all the bases. But it's so short that it can just like sit there at the top of their brain housing group and just function. It's almost like programming codes or I guess milestones or waypoints for them. Yeah, and that's worked. But I regret doing this. But when Enrique was visiting, I told him, I said, I don't think you'll ever earn your blue belt. And he's like, why do you say that? And Liz is like, yeah, why do you say that? She immediately, she didn't like the way that I was taking it. But me being their father and knowing what pushes them and what doesn't, Enrique needs, to a certain extent, a small amount of negative reinforcement in order to get across that finish line. And then he'll if he gets the negative reinforcement from me, he'll get the positive reinforcement from mom, and we can kind of be that yin and yang to push him in the direction that he needs to go. And we saw that with his pursuit of his Eagle Scout rank within the Scouts, because he did it at the last minute. But he did it through, me almost being the negative reinforcement and mom being the negative reinforcement to a certain extent, and a phenomenal mentor in Mark Klingon, who's now a brigadier general, who took a direct and active role in Enrique's development and progression to attain that rank. To include, like, I had, him and even my 06 colonel on the MEF staff, painting inside the building that we renovated on base for his Eagle Scout project. So in that way, we covered the bases through an extended family that we built on our own because we're not around our extended family.
Yeah.
But it's funny because Enrique, about maybe 2 or 3 days ago, messaged me and was like, "Hey, can you send me my gi?" I'm like, "What? What was that?" And it took, one of his fraternity brothers to mention that he'd always wanted to train jiu-jitsu, and Enrique's like, I've been training jiu-jitsu since like around 2014, off and on. I've competed in some places in Tokyo and the Dominican Republic and here and there, but
big deal.
But no big deal. Like, I'm not, I'm not an assassin. I'm just, maybe above average, if that. I'm just a white belt with a couple of stripes. And hey, do you know a place where we can train? Yeah, we can train the guy that I train with here in San Antonio. His name is Maha. He's, I think yesterday or today just got his 6th degree black belt.
Wow.
Right. And so Enrique's like, "Yeah, can you send me a gi?" And he was like, "What about my buddy? Can you send him a gi too?" He should buy his gi from Maha.
Yeah.
Right. You have a relationship with Maha. You can show up wearing the Origin gi as you should, right? Because it's made in America. But your friend should buy a gi from Maha in order to support his academy and to keep him up and running. I think that there's some value to that, right? Because hell, teaching jiu-jitsu, it's difficult to keep the doors open right now.
Yeah, it is. Just to kind of unpack that a little bit too. Something I've found out is, and this could be true with Enrique, your son, is that people get what they need out of jiu-jitsu sometimes in a lot shorter time than what you and I do. We get all this, we get what we need, but we need that continually.
True.
Some people don't need that. And
that's probably true.
So I don't worry about you because you've, even though you're not actively training right now, it's a puzzle piece of your life. You relate to it and you need it. Right. And that's the same thing with me. So, you saying that he may not get his blue belt, that may not be a bad thing. Maybe he does. Maybe he proves you wrong. He gets to rub it in your face, which I'll enjoy.
And you better not just promote him just based off of longevity,
right? And
without ever having trained with them.
Right? Just throw it at him. The first time I meet him, I'll have a blue belt with me. Like, you're a blue belt now. Ha ha, dick. So you're taking the right approach there. I think so. But there's another point I wanted to make. Well, there is that point. And then, so I talked to a lady last night that she said her daughter trains. And you're talking about self-defense, right? Yeah. Defending yourself. So the one thing I always talk to parents about, the thing I like about jiu-jitsu in comparison to other martial arts is every other martial arts is about destruction. You're physically destroying the person you're defending yourself against. So like I did boxing. I can't nicely punch you, especially if you're attacking me.
Right.
I can't be like, and you're like, oh, this guy knows how to box. I'm going to stop fighting him. I'm going to have to break your nose, or knock you unconscious. So if I want to strike with jiu-jitsu, so she said, yeah, my daughter's been doing jiu-jitsu for 6 years and she still has bullies. She's still dealing with bully and she won't stand up to him. And I'm like, because she's afraid of hurting him. I said, well, have you explained to her that she doesn't have to hurt them? That's the beauty of jiu-jitsu. Her doing jiu-jitsu for 6 years is she can pretty much apprehend somebody and control them.
Yeah.
You can nicely take them down. You can get them down there, get into a dominant position, wait for someone to come, or just control them until they realize they've been bested.
Yeah.
Or choke them unconscious.
Knee on belly.
Yeah, until they shit their pants. Or you can choke them unconscious, which doesn't hurt them. That's
as long as you let go.
Yeah, as long as you let go. It's not like in the movies though. It's not going to take 4 seconds and they're dead. That's the one thing with law enforcement officers and the trend that's going right now in a lot of cities that ban chokeholds. And to an extent, I kind of agree with it. And to a larger extent, I don't agree.
I think it's the application of the chokeholds that probably should bear the most.
I don't think it's the
most of the criticism.
Well, maybe I don't think it's the application. I think it is the officer being lost in the moment. And if I have several officers, I pride myself in wanting to be my town's academy where their law enforcement officers want to train. And I've been building that.
Right.
So, that being said, I have a really good, I could probably put a purple belt on him right now. He's a 4-stripe blue belt. I'm going to make him wait a little longer.
Because there's no rush, right?
No, there's no rush. And like, if I make him wait a little longer, he's just going to be a better purple belt. You know, that's the consequence of that. If I promote him too fast, he's going to be a worse purple belt. You know, and there's already a lot of stuff that comes with those belts. But he'll tell me, like, someone will buck up to him and he'll just be like, you don't want to do that. Like, you need to stop what you're doing. You don't want to attack me. And the person kind of looks at him and they're like, this guy's like really confident about me not wanting to attack. Yeah. I want to attack him. I want to do something to him. But there's a weird thing about how he says this. And he just de-escalates, you know. But if he was to get into a position where he was allowed to, he's not allowed to unless deadly force is authorized. That's the caveat to chokeholds, is if someone's gunning you down with an AR, you can choke them. But if he was to choke somebody, he wouldn't be lost in the passion of fighting because he does it almost every day in the gym.
Right.
So even if he gets put in a bad position, he's going to be like, oh, I know what to do from here.
Do you think it's the lack of mat time, the lack of exposure,
100%. A lack of training? So they get a couple weeks of training in basic, and then they have to get cleat hours. But that can be, you can have pretty much the equivalent of Master Ken like we have here, teaching something. You know, he's a character, but teaching like bullshit to these officers that are going to get them killed, and those count for cleat hours. Or you have, you know, defensive tactics, and you have like
CLEAT stands for continuous learning, education, and training.
Sure, I don't know. It does.
I'm asking.
Oh, I don't know.
That's my informed, educated guess.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is continuing education, so they have to have that. So it could be, but. You know, a lot of academies, larger academies, have DT instructors, which are defensive tactics. So I got really lucky. I got the one in my town. He's training now. And I was like, I told him when I talked to him in private, and I said, dude, you don't know how proud I am of you walking in here and starting jiu-jitsu. Because now, from here on out, when you say something that for the most part pertains to ground fighting, there's a level of legitimacy. But everything before that may have not been, because you're not training. And so they'll get that occasionally. Like once a year, they'll do a week or a couple of days of defensive tactics. But that's not enough, as you know. Like,
yeah.
It's like, we've got beginners in here, like people that have come for Jocko just to try jiu-jitsu.
We have one guy that was just using one of the shoestrings from his
belt
for his belt
the belt on his pants.
I almost went back to the room to grab him a blue belt, but that would have just put a target on him.
Oh, right, yeah, they'd be like, "This is a terrible blue belt. Where do you train at?" I was like, "I don't train." Well, how the hell do you have a blue belt? I almost want to start bringing white belts with me. But
maybe that's something we can work with Kitaro. I don't know why, but I just fucking love their belts.
Dude, they're nice.
Yeah,
they're super nice. Like I have one, but I got too fat, so I got an A1, and then I was like, this fits perfect. Then COVID happened, and I gained 30 pounds. I'm like, this thing doesn't fit for shit anymore. And you know, I spent the money on it. I had written on it, "Be the change." So on the non-tab side. So
which goes on the right side, right? Depending on which.
Yeah, the non-tech side goes on the right side. You're right. You tried to troll me, but you played yourself. Yeah, I mean these officers. So the couple things that happen is they learn actual technique.
Yeah.
You know, they learn over time. Like when you grab an arm bar, you can kind of feel when the arm's going to break.
Right.
You know what I mean? And for me, I've been doing it now for 11 years. I can tell where it's going. I can tell when the choke is in. I can tell when I'm on something that's not where it's supposed to be. And but a lot of what the other reason why they don't like chokes is because they use domestic violence as the measurement for chokes, for fatalities that are from chokes.
So there's a methodology in terms of assessing the data behind the lethality of that technique. Okay.
And the person's lost. So you look at like, you look at the guy that the absolute dumbass piece of shit of a person that kept his knee on that dude's neck for 10 minutes.
Right.
He wasn't in the right frame of mind. He wasn't clear-minded when he was doing that. I mean, maybe, and he's a psychopath, which is scary, but I think he was lost in the moment. And the more training you get, this as a Marine, they put you guys through an extensive course,
right.
for you to go fight, and it's the same thing with this, except the training isn't as good,
Yeah, and I think that's probably been one of my probably my single greatest criticism of the Marine Corps martial arts program is that it doesn't have the level of sustainment hours that it probably should in order to be an effective fighting system. And so in a lot of ways it almost it dangerously grants a level of confidence that is unmerited to the individual Marine. And so for all of the guys that I've trained with in the mat room, the MCMAP instructors that were occupying the same space with me, and I'd come in at like 5, 6 in the morning with a bunch of my corporals as a master sergeant, and we would, as a white belt, I was teaching them the things that I learned the night before, the week before, just fundamental hip escapes, how to get out of mount. This is what side control is. This is why it sucks, right? Yeah. This is knee on belly. And with the understanding that enough mat time with me, even at a white belt, would equate to a lack of anxiety when they're doing the MCMAP training, which would then result in them actively pursuing it and then going further down that path, but with the understanding that the real standard should be embracing the idea that you should always be training for a worst case scenario. And then the other component was to expose them, microdosing the level of tranquility and serenity that comes after that session, right? So they see that and they're like, oh man, this is nice. And then, because if I had a master sergeant that said, hey, Corporal Castro, come here, let's go to the mat room, let's go roll, I'd been like, fuck no.
Yeah, you're about to beat my ass. You're trying to prove something.
Yeah, but after because there was that component to it, at least initially, and so we started off just swinging a kettlebell, doing Turkish get-ups as kind of like the warm-up, basically Pavel Satsulin's like methodology, and then we would go right into rolling, and inevitably there would be a Marine Corps martial arts program instruction period going on the other side of the mat room, and we'd sit over there in our gis and a bunch of white belts and do our own thing. But we had a blast. Sometimes, I had to be cognizant in that I was looking to just get more rolls in, as well as, expose the Marines to the benefits of it. But I had to pull back just to observe and make sure that they were being safe. I mean, we got a bunch of white belts just going ham on each other.
Yeah.
Right? You can imagine that, altercations or dust ups in the barracks could manifest themselves out on the tatami. And that's never a good thing. But overall, they got something out of it. And I did too. I think it was what really kind of, allowed me to accelerate my progress while I was there in Okinawa, because I was having to articulate that which was conveyed to me somewhat recently and frame it in a way that they understood, and then they could, duplicate on their own, right? With and it goes back to like the systems approach to training that we have, like task, condition, standard, without the aid of reference and a timeline of, whatever, be able to execute these steps to do an arm bar or to do a, hip escape. You name it. But one of the things that we were discussing last night that I kind of wanted to circle back on was the potential to actually organize something similar to what's going on here, but in Texas.
Yeah.
For veterans.
Yeah.
And of course, I think we've probably got some work to do in order to find a venue, but we've got some leads, and I think that would go a long way towards ensuring that this experience isn't exclusive to, Maine, right? And that we would be able to kind of replicate the success elsewhere, but fine tune it for a very specific demographic. And, I know that you and JP both have, plenty of contacts within not only the jiu-jitsu community, but the veteran support communities. And being able to leverage that towards that end. Can you just kind of walk me through like your concept? If Marshall was king for a day, how would that work out? How long would it be? How many participants? What do you think the optimal, size, weight, and power configuration would be for something along those lines?
Yeah. I don't know if it would be an instructor. So just like any time when you're on the mats teaching, it's always the problem with the larger the class is, the more people you need on the mats watching, either watching or instructing. So if we could get quite a bit of instructors to volunteer, then we could really open it up. Like they have 10 or 12 here.
Yeah.
And the last time we were here, they had about that many. And they had 600 people here is what they said. So this time they have 300. So I don't think finding instructors to teach would be very hard to volunteer their time. I know with enough notice, like Alan and all of them would be super grateful to teach something like that, and they're always excited to help other veterans. That's I think, not to sidetrack too much, but that's one thing that I've really admired about the veteran community is how much they will just bend over backwards to help another veteran. It's probably one of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced and seen in the community is if I have a veteran that's struggling or needs something and another veteran catches wind of it, not to quote Jocko too much, but it's not a factor. They're like, what does this person need?
No factor.
Yeah, exactly. So, but
let's see if we can get him to say it and splice it in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, main thing that I really want, so We Defy kind of re-geared a little bit in the sense that they were kind of just sponsoring veterans. Well, some of them were already doing jiu-jitsu. Maybe they were struggling financially and stuff like that. We still deal with those kind of people, getting them sponsored.
Right.
So most people watching this or listening to this podcast probably don't know what We Defy Foundation is. So it's a 501c3 that sponsors disabled combat veterans to start jiu-jitsu. Used to is just to do jiu-jitsu.
Okay.
But now we want people to start the journey. So
essentially providing therapeutic relief to disabled combat veterans through jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. So good job reading my shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the mission statement. You're right. So they pay for the first year of jiu-jitsu. They give them all their uniforms. I think if I remember right, they provide them with 2 gis, 2 rash guards, everything they need, their belts to get started.
What about like a stipend for or a voucher for like they take a voucher to a professor that's on an approved list to be able to cover the cost for training?
Well, you mean for them being new?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's essentially what it is. They pay for a year.
Okay.
So, and they pay month to month. So as long as they're training, they're paying.
Okay.
So we haven't that we have an engagement team that stays in contact with them. One of my students is she's a she's a social worker. She's working on becoming a licensed therapist. And her husband, she served in the Air Force. She's not a combat veteran, but I was like, this is perfect. You need to be on this engagement team. So those people call and make sure that they're doing all right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, are you getting the training? Are you going to training? Because sometimes this is the crazy. You have like guys that are alphas, you know what I mean? Most people that are in the military have kind of that mentality, but their anxiety is so bad they can't make it through the door
Because they don't want to lose.
No,
They don't want to be vulnerable.
I
They don't want to be exposed.
don't think it's that. It's usually not an ego thing. It's just they
'Cause
think.
I see a lot of ego in the military.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's America. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So it's like, it's the greatest superpower ever known. So, I mean, you can see why you take pride in that, especially being part of their military. It's the greatest military ever created. Backtracking now that you know what We Defy does and what all they do, like, you know, they get veterans involved in jiu-jitsu.
Why aren't they going to class?
Why aren't they going to class? So their depression, their anxiety, you know, gets them in a rut. You know, a lot of these guys. So you talked about this earlier. You said the thing I like about the Marine Corps is the camaraderie and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Well, the thing I hate about the military is they do a great job at training you and getting you. So you have like the best training, you know, available to you for the most part for you to do your job. But when you get out of the military, guess what they don't do? They don't teach you how to be a civilian a lot of times. And these combat veterans are dealing with that.
Yeah. So the transition process is not as universally, I would say, available or as universally applied across the spectrum as it probably could or should be.
Exactly. And then you get these guys that their job was to click triggers. You know what I mean? So that's all they know, you know?
Semi-skilled machine operators.
Yeah. And then they serve. Maybe they do a couple tours. Maybe they see shit they didn't want to see. I won't say that they shouldn't, but because most people take pride in doing what they did, in the fact that they know they signed up for it. So, but then when they get out, they're funneled out, you know, or maybe they get hurt, and the military's just like, see ya. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then they're like, what do I do? I mean, I had a guy, one of my first veterans I worked with, I was talking about this earlier. He was like a M32 operator. You know what I mean? He shot grenade launchers. You know,
Yeah.
that was his deal, right? And the biggest thing they struggled with when he got out was like he lost that sense of camaraderie. So, and then he's like, what do I do? Like, I've been trained to kill. That's all I was trained to do was to kill, you know, and then, you know, he was ambushed several times. He had a friend step on an IED and he right in front of him, you know, and then what did he use to cope with that? Alcohol, you know? So he's in this other routine. So I got him to start jiu-jitsu. Okay. But then I have to get him in the routine of doing jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. To develop the habit and essentially the battle rhythm.
Exactly. So what I found out was effective was just telling them when and what time they were supposed to be at jiu-jitsu.
Like the first sergeant or the company gunny.
That's what I learned from guys that were in leadership positions. Like they told you that was one thing they lost. And what I learned from talking to veterans is they would lose their sense of schedule. You know, because when they woke up in the morning, they knew where they were supposed to be in chow hall at this time. They were supposed to be reporting in at this time, blah, 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 blah. And everything was organized. Then when they get out, that's all gone. They have all this freedom.
That structure does help.
Yeah. So, so I just had to tell him, like, he wouldn't show up. Like, classes are at this time. So finally I was like, dude, classes at 6:30 tonight, that's where you're going to be at 6:30. He's like, yes, sir.
Be 15 minutes early.
Yeah. And he was like, yes, sir. He would always say, before, like, he would be like, okay, like that. When I told him his ass needed to be at class at 6:30 p.m., he would just, yes, sir. And he would be there.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So, I watched this guy. So something I haven't talked about yet was I learned through doing sales that I could naturally capture micro expressions. So I could see micro expressions. This particular veteran was one of my first veterans to ever work with. And I was kind of unofficially with WeDefy at this time. But he walks into the gym. I still remember this. And anytime I see a micro expression that could be of several different emotions, but one of the ones that I really capture is like sadness. And I think I've worked with a lady that teaches like the CIA, FBI, stuff like that about micro expressions and stuff like that. And she said, I've talked to her to kind of get better understanding. She said a lot of times the emotions that you deal with, you're able to capture naturally. You know what I mean? So, I deal with my own depression, stuff like that. So one of the things that's really on heightened, on alert is sadness. He walks in and I get a Polaroid shot of an expression from him. And I was like, that guy's fucked up. Like, not like mentally, he's fucked up. He is not in a good place. And I was like, I'm partnering with him today. Like, that's who I'm partnering with.
Yeah.
He's a brand new white belt. And I think it was a blue belt at the time. So I grab him and we're partnering. And at the end of the class, I make sure to make a statement like, hey, if you're in a bad place, contact me. If you ever find yourself, there's numbers and stuff like that. You can always contact them. But if you don't feel comfortable and you want to keep it private and stuff like that, contact me. If you're a combat veteran, I'm very lucky that I have a guy that's an E8 in the Army that's done several combat tours. He also has his master's in psychology. One thing he wants to do is work for the VA and be a therapist when he gets out.
Awesome.
So I have him as a resource, and he's like 24/7. If someone calls me, I said, all you have to do is say you want to talk to a veteran. You can talk to me. Just know I'm not going to be able to empathize with you on some things.
Right.
I've never seen my friend blown up in front of me.
Yeah.
And I've never seen the stuff that you guys have seen. But I can get you someone to talk to. So I say that the next morning, that veteran contacts me. He says, I need to talk to a veteran. I said, perfect, man. I got the guy for you, dude. Are you going to be around your phone in the next, you okay staying on the phone? He goes, yeah. So I 3-way call my buddy, Benny Brown is his name. And I may have his rank wrong, so I apologize for that. But he patch him in, and then I just get off the phone call and let them talk. Long story short, he had committed that night, the next day, to take his life. He was ready to take his life. He contacted me. I got him in contact with Benny, and we got his weapons out of his house. So that was the first thing. We're like, hey, we need to get your weapons out of your house, because you're a danger to yourself, unfortunately. Got him therapy, got him into an inpatient, got him into detox, got him alcohol. He had a daughter that he didn't get to see. And unfortunately, his daughter, the lady that his baby's mother, was strung out on methamphetamine. But the state gave her custody. So he's fighting this, but he's not. I'm like, brother, you're not where you need to be to get custody of your daughter. This is the road that you need to go on. You need to get therapy. We need to figure this stuff out. You need to talk to a professional, what you've talked to me about. And you need to realize alcohol cannot be in your life anymore. It just cannot be a thing. And got him off of alcohol. Eventually he got full custody of his daughter. And all that started with jiu-jitsu. One of the things that I took him down to Dallas. It was the only guy I had. I told him, hey, if you want to compete at any point in time, you let me know. Give me enough notice. I'll travel. So he's like, hey, I found a tournament down in Dallas I want to do. I'm like, perfect, let's do it, man. So I take him down to Dallas. He was a former wrestler, so he already had some experience with grappling. He wins. And still this day, he got collar dragged the hardest I've ever seen anyone get collar dragged. It was nasty. and he landed right in front of me, and we made eye contact while he was slamming face first in the mat, and I was like, ugh. So, but
what
he
did
got
your
back
micro
up and
expressions say then?
yeah, it was like, that's ugly. I'm sorry, bud. So it wasn't even a micro expression. It was a macro expression. I was like, I held that face for a while. But he won. He ended up getting back up, persevering. Because I told him, I'm like, hey, you don't quit. Because I could see him starting to quit. And I was like, hey, you don't quit. And he was like, boom, and won the match. He gets up on the podium and he's smiling. And I take a picture of him and I send it to him later. And I say, hey, when's the last time you smiled like that? And he's like, dude, I have no idea. He's like, I can't tell you. It's been a long time, man. So, but long story short, I only got to keep him in jiu-jitsu for maybe 5-6 months. He doesn't do jiu-jitsu anymore. But that was enough. That's when I realized, like, sometimes that's all they need. You know, maybe they just need 5 or 6 months. And they run into the right person. They get the right thing out of jiu-jitsu. And then that gets the ball rolling. And he does like competitive shooting and stuff like that. So, which is fine. I'm like, hey man, you do need to have a hobby. You can't just be sitting at home. And he liked growing mushrooms. That was one of the things, like legitimate, not magic mushrooms, like stuff you cook with. So got that business rolling, and I've seen that happen so many times now, and I can't help it now. I'm such an empath in the fact, and with the micro expressions that so the ladies in the engagement team, she almost hates me sometimes because I've talked to her about all this stuff, and then sometimes she'll walk in and I'll just be like, hey, you doing okay? And she's like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, are you doing okay? She's like, man, I hate that you can tell that I had a bad day. I was like, hey, it's okay. You're here now. Let's just train. If you still feel the same after training, let's talk about it. And then normally they train, and then I can see the change in them. And then it's okay. Everything's okay. They go back home. They do everything they're supposed to do, and they live a healthy life. But I think a lot of them so that's why I was telling you, the back door, those are the people that aren't going to the VA.
Yeah.
They're not, some of them aren't even connected to the VA. And it's like, so this is the way for me to go back into the back door and help them and get them going and get them moving and save their life. And, it's like at the end of the day, when you're not here, you talked about this with your kids, you wanted them. So it's like, what are you leaving? Most of them want to pay me back in some way. So I just tell them, pay it forward and everything, then just make it a grassroots movement. I just want, now they feel obligated that they need to help somebody else. So they go and help somebody else. And then they say the same thing to them, and it just spreads and spreads and spreads. So, but that's been the fulfillment of this jiu-jitsu. That's what I went from a job that paid extremely well, which was the car business, but it just wasn't fulfilling. And so then when I got into this industry and I helped Jared and watched, I made a legitimate impact on his life. Not only did I make a legitimate impact on his life, what's his daughter going to be like now?
Yeah.
She has a loving father that's sober and doesn't want to take his life instead of a meth head mother. She had a meth head mother and an alcoholic father that wanted to kill himself. That kid was God knows where that daughter would have ended up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's just kind of the beautiful thing of what you can do with jiu-jitsu.
It's a game with a purpose.
It is a game with a purpose. A gang with a purpose.
Game.
Oh, game. I thought it could be a gang with a purpose too. That's why it kind of seems cultish. Like we talked about when Echo Charles got his black belt.
Yeah.
We were all slamming on the mats, like just foaming at the mouth, and essentially. But the reason it's like that is just it's so therapeutic. They have some research studies. One of them that it wasn't huge because jiu-jitsu is not huge, but they showed that as little as 30 hours shows permanent effects in combating PTSD. So that's like 5 or 6 months. I saw that with Jared. He probably got 30 to 40 hours of jiu-jitsu and maybe a little bit more than that. But it was enough for him to turn his life around, And that's what We Defy is doing. You know, they're literally saving people's lives, and then which is going to turn around, and those people are going to be able to continue on with their life, you know, because these veterans, a lot of times that's what they want to do, is the same thing that I'm doing, is just help people, you know. They already serve their country, but they continue wanting to serve in some fashion. So, but they're just not, you got to help yourself before you can help others. So, and sometimes they're just not in that position just yet. So, but that's what we're doing. I mean, you know, you never know the numbers. Like, is the number of pursuits going down because of the war? I don't know, you know, but we see the change. Well, I mean, I can see these veterans and stuff. Like, I get a guy. So, case in point, the lady that I have, her husband started training, and he's tried twice. He's in intelligence. I don't know exactly what he does, because to be honest with you, when he said he can't talk about it.
Yeah.
So I talked to him not too long ago, and I said, you know, you probably have it. I've dealt with a lot of combat veterans, and I said, you probably have it. I know you haven't seen some of that stuff, but I think you have it just as bad, because you don't get to talk. You don't get to go home and decompress. You can't go home and talk to your wife about what you did at work. It's the same thing with you. You know, I talked to you about this. So I asked him, what do you want to get out of jiu-jitsu? Like, I think that's why you haven't continued with jiu-jitsu. And he's given me so far, it's kind of a hard egg to crack. I want to get in better shape. I'm like, cool. Let's get you in better shape. And then when we get to that point, let's look and see what you want to do from there. And we'll make another plan. And he's buying in now. He's finally buying in, you know, which is a cool thing. And he's a super nice guy, you know. They have 2 kids that train too, and it's just like, they're phenomenal people. But we'll see what it does for him. Hopefully, you know, he's kind of, maybe he's a little stubborn. He doesn't want to go get help, you know, but that's what I specialize in. Yeah. Guys that don't want to get help, you know, that need help. So, and that'll just continue on. And then someone will pick up the torch when I'm ready to get rid of it, which will probably be when I'm not here anymore. So, or I hope so.
But that's the case for all of us.
Yeah.
And with that, we're out.
Perfect.